within this university, we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. And I think it'd be remiss of me not to mention and remember also the great Charles Perkins, in whose auditorium, memorial auditorium we gather today. My name is Julian Morrow. I think this is the first time, despite being many years a student at Sydney University, that I've attended, well, actually any lecture, but in particular an event to do with science. But I am very, very pleased to be here as part of this event. You might know, however, that I generally work for the ABC, and the ABC has an obligation to be balanced. And so while I've said I am pleased to be here, I also have to say I'm also not pleased to be here, just to make it clear and balanced. I'm still getting used to the conventions of these things now, but just so that you know, my pronouns are he and him, and my adjectives are old, overweight, and past his prime. So if you could use those, it'll make me feel a lot more comfortable. This session today will feature, and I'm quoting directly here from the blurb that brought you to this event, an expert panel of psychologists and academics who will examine how properly understanding and managing relatively new social impacts of online engagement is crucial so that we can strive for a balanced and nuanced approach that supports our mental health, fosters genuine connections, and harnesses the power of digital technology for the greater good. That should take about 8 minutes to do that, and then it'll be open questions from there. But we'll basically knock everything off quickly because we've got a high-powered panel of people who've got some very interesting things to say about this subject. So I'll introduce you to them now, one at a time. Please first make welcome Professor Mark Dadds, who's Director of Growing Minds Australia, and from this School of Psychology as well. Welcome, Mark. Founding co-director of the Child Behaviour Research Clinic, and also the director of the Australian Clinical Trials Network in Child and Youth Mental Health. Is that right? Yeah, that's it. Excellent. Good. Excellent. Please also make welcome Dr. Jasmine Fadouli, who is also a senior lecturer in psychology at the University of Sydney, where she leads a research program investigating positive and negative social media content for users' body image and mental health. And Jasmine's also doing one of the prestigious Sydney Horizon Fellowships, which we might hear something about later on. Please also welcome to the stage Associate Professor Andrew J. Campbell from the School of Medical Sciences and the Faculty of Medicine and Health. And Andrew leads Australia's first cyber psychology research group, where he's trying to make friends with the robots before they overtake us. No, that is not right. Andrew's a registered and practicing psychologist for more than 15 years and has led research in the field of virtual therapies and the use of internet tools for mental health and well-being. So great to have you here too, Andrew. And then also please make welcome Dr. Rebecca Pincus, Senior Lecturer, School of Psychology, University of Sydney. Rebecca's research interests are in social cognition within close relationships, and she's interested in how individuals balance concerns with self and concerns with their relationships, and how partners can help or hinder each other's health outcomes. And as an expert in hindering a partner's health outcomes, I'm looking forward to hearing about the other side of that equation. The way this event is going to work is we'll hear from each of our panellists for a few minutes. They'll give us an introduction to their thoughts on this subject and some of the work that they've done. That'll be for about 3 minutes each, so 3 by 4, it'll probably take about half an hour. And then we'll have a panel discussion amongst ourselves here, and then we'll open it up to questions from you a little bit later on as well. So during the conversation, if there's something that you'd like to ask, start thinking about your question and what you'd like to say, then halve it, take out the biographical information and put the question in. It's great to get as many questions as we can, but if you can make your questions concise and clear and to sort of follow on from the conversation that we've been having, that would be great and possibly unprecedented. So we'll look forward to that part of it. But now I will throw over to Mark Dadds to give us the first introductory spiel.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Do I click on the next slide? Turn it on. Thank you so much.
And that's all we have time for. Thank you.
Your time's up, mate. No. Okay, I'm here because I'm a child psychologist, and that doesn't mean I'm immature like my wife says. It means I work with children, and I run a clinic at the university where we treat children who have early onset mental health problems. And that can be anything from things like autism and ADHD and a conduct disorder and so on, through to just people that are parents that are incredibly worried about their kids because they won't eat their vegetables and things like that. So we work with the parents, which is the evidence-based way of doing this, to help their kids get on the right footing in life and so on. I'm not an expert at online digital age and everything. I'm really here about the children and the mental health. So what I thought I'd do is just quickly show you from my experience of working in this clinic and research with children, what I've found to be some positives and negatives about digital age coming into child mental health. So the first one is I've put up a figure there which shows the main positive for us has been over the last few years is that we now can offer access to evidence-based care for people all over Australia. So if you look at that figure there on your right, you can see all those red lines. We used to just be able to help families near us in Sydney, but now since we've gone online, we can reach out to all over New South Wales, in fact all over Australia now, and we can work with parents online. And very interesting, if you look at that figure there, it shows in the blue lines how parents felt about actually working face-to-face with a therapist versus the green lines, the green lines were face-to-face, the blue lines were working online. And people loved it, especially the fathers. They turned up more often and they went, this is fabulous. And you can see there, see that middle figure? That shows the mental health problems in the kids we worked with, and we got equal effects for the families that came in and worked with us live as the ones that did it online. So it's been a revolution in terms of access to evidence-based care in my area. The bad news, okay, the first one really drives me crazy. Even though we've improved access to evidence-based care, we've also improved access to complete codswallop on the internet. And if you're in my area and you want to look up about how to raise children, you can find any bit of nonsense imaginable. And so we spend a lot of our time now trying to help people to overcome the nonsense they've read about online about parenting and so on. So this is a negative I see. The parents we work with, they have massive problems with managing screen times in their kids. And just recently we had some kids that were threatening suicide and so on if their screens were taken away from them. And it really gets very violent and parents are struggling with that. So that's something we've had to learn, how to work with parents on that. And my third one is, kids have always been exposed to bullying and porn and all sorts of things we don't want them to be exposed to. But boy, are we hothousing that now. And if you talk to kids, they can get access to almost anything. Extreme views, violence, porn, whatever. Very hard to manage children's exposure to that. So that's my summary. Child psychologists see some positives, but also worried about some negatives as well.
Thanks very much, Mark. And I think it really is important to remember the positives and the virtues that can be achieved with the technology that often parents in particular are struggling with, because, you know, there's two sides to every coin. Yeah, we might explore a little bit later how much, how evenly balanced those sides are, to horribly mix a metaphor. Let's move on to Jasmine now and hear what you'd like to present.
So I'm going to very quickly, in 3 minutes, talk about kind of an overview of the research on social media, body image, and mental health. So there've been, ooh, that was not my first slide. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, that's my screen.
I'm worried about your body image. So there's been a lot of research looking at how much time young people spend on social media and screens and linking that with their body image and mental health. And when you review this literature, there are some inconsistent findings, but research that does find relationships suggests that the relationships are quite weak. Stronger and more consistent findings come up when you look at the content and the activities that people engage in when they're on social media. So what people do seems to be more important for their body image and mental health than just generally spending time on these platforms. Now, beauty ideals are very narrowly defined and unattainable for most people. And we know that images like this are quite widespread on social media platforms, especially visual platforms like Instagram and videos similar to this on TikTok. And experimental research suggests that viewing this type of content can make people feel bad about their bodies and put them in a negative mood, because we compare our own appearance to the people's appearance in this content and judge ourselves to be less attractive, and because we can take on these ideals for ourselves and kind of internalize these beauty ideals. There are also algorithms within social media platforms that can prioritize this idealized content, especially for people who are most vulnerable to body image concerns. So if somebody chooses to follow an influencer or a content creator who posts idealized content, or if they spend a few more seconds looking at a weight loss ad on their social media platforms, then the algorithm might think they want to see more of that content, and very quickly it can become quite a toxic appearance-based environment for those who we are probably most concerned about. But it's not all bad. We're finding that there's actually content on social media that makes people feel better about their bodies. So this content includes images and videos of diverse body shapes and sizes. It includes natural, unedited bodies, content that really challenges beauty ideals, challenges the importance we place on physical appearance, and promotes the acceptance of all bodies. So when it comes to body image, I think the question is, how do we get more positive content and less harmful content into people's social media environments?
Great.
And that's me.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. Now over to you, Andrew.
Sure. So I run the psychology research group, which is in a different area of the university. It's actually in faculty of medical and science. Our background really is multidisciplinary. So we look at things sociologically, psychologically, from many different points of view, computer science as well. And so I've sort of picked 3 projects we've done over the last nearly 15 years, just to sort of highlight some topics tonight. The first was actually going back early 2010s to 2012, when we were looking at training programs for teaching people to deal with abnormal disorders or behavioural disorders. This was mostly designed actually to train the trainer, more or less, clinicians, allied health professionals and so on. But the reason why I dug it up also is because we're starting to see a lot of the metaverse come about, and we're starting to see artificial intelligence and virtual humans interplaying in the way we actually interact online. And so this was a study that was very much about training, as I mentioned, but it's something that really is evolving further into what we're seeing as young people wanting to portray themselves online as well, having avatars, having virtual selves. The second one is probably our major project, or it is our major project, lasted for nearly 12 years. We designed, conceptualized from scratch, a social media platform for Kids Helpline that actually could help kids with mental health problems with a counsellor present, but keep the kids anonymous, involve the Australian Federal Police for tracking them if necessary, if they were suicidal or any other problems. And over 5 iterations of building the social network, we've actually launched it. It was officially launched a few years ago, about 2020, just in time for COVID. So we got a lot of kids that came on the platform, and what's unique about it is that the kids get to talk to other kids with mental health problems that are very much equivalent. So 13 and 14-year-olds are paired together with other 13 and 14-year-olds with a counsellor present, and they're able to share their stories. It's not a treatment platform, it's a management platform. So most of these young people are getting help in their local towns, wherever they are in Australia and now in New Zealand as well. But they can share their stories online in a safe environment that is actually approved by the AFP and also the E-Safety Commission. So we're very proud of that, and we've got a lot of data on how we evidence-based it. What I can tell you is, if you want to build a social network, don't. It was absolutely one of the most trying things we've ever done, but we were successful, and we're glad it's working, and hopefully now it's going to be modelled in other parts of the world. And the last thing I wanted to mention was just before COVID started, I was partnering with HP. They, as a tech company, wanted to take on something that other tech companies surprisingly don't want to take on, and that was the welfare of people in general and the time that they are online. We talked about screen use. And their idea was, can we stop talking about time online and talk about what we do online and whether that's good for us or bad for us? And we developed a tool that was actually visual, and the reason why we wanted it to be visual was that it was cross-cultural, cross-language. We didn't want something that was going to be specific only to English speakers or a high level of affluence, or we wanted it accessible to everybody. So we developed a tool called Reflect. I'm happy to talk to anybody after this about giving resources to this, but it actually looks at 4 things of what you do online for health and wellness. One is your productivity, whether you're at school or whether you're at work. How much is actually productive versus how much is not productive. We look at creativity, because it's a big part of being human. What is good creativity versus perhaps time-wasting creativity? And we looked at health and wellness, and we also looked at social connectedness that was meaningful, not just social networks, but actually spending quality time with people online that we can see is equivalent to what we would do offline. And with those 4 pillars, we were able to create a nice little visual representation of a balance of time online. And it also is situational to where you are in the world. And I'll finish on this point. We didn't want somebody to feel guilty that they spent, say, 8 hours online if they're actually on a flight, for example, flying across country and they've got Wi-Fi access, they're doing emails and so on. That could be a productive 8 hours. But if you're 8 hours sitting in your bedroom, not doing anything else, that could be a non-productive 8 hours. So we tried to balance it on situational of where you were in your life at that time. And that's roughly what we do. We look at technology and we try to human-centrify it. There we go.
Thanks so much, Andrew. I really hope you never get to see my productivity stats for online use, but that is fascinating. And now we'll hear from Rebecca.
It's on. There you go. Yep.
Fantastic. There are 4 areas that I'd like to highlight about close relationships in the digital age and mental health. And the first area I'd like to focus on is the proliferation of online dating apps. There are currently about 3 million Australians using dating apps, and worldwide there are about 365 million users of dating apps. So this is quite a common and also effective way to meet a prospective partner, a prospective romantic partner, but excessive use of these platforms is associated with some risks. The second area I'd like to talk about is how technology can help to facilitate and enhance our romantic relationship, specifically people who are in long-distance relationships. So with the rise of technology, we see a suite of communication tools that are available to people who are in long-distance relationships, as well as people who are in geographically close relationships. But things like having a smartphone, allowing you to make phone calls, send text messages, and even do video calls with their romantic partner in a different city, helps people to connect across geographic distances and time zones and make time for one another and enhance support and maintain their relationships. But it's not so easy as just sending your partner a flurry of text messages. The partner, it's an interactive kind of exercise. The partner has to engage and actually respond to those text messages in order for there to be benefits to relationship satisfaction in a long-distance relationship. The third area I'd like to mention is the idea or the phenomenon of phubbing. So phubbing is phone plus snubbing, and it's the experience reflected by a person who's paying more attention to their smartphone than to the person who's right in front of them. And this is not an effect that's limited to people in romantic relationships. It happens in friendships, and it happens in teenager-parent relationships. I can see those of you in the audience who happen to be parents of teenagers nodding your heads in recognition of what it feels like to try to have a conversation with someone whose head is down looking at their device. Needless to say, the experience of being phubbed is not very pleasant, and it leads to dissatisfaction in those relationships. The fourth area I'd like to mention is the rise of AI companions. So for years now, we've been talking to Siri, we've been talking with Alexa. Those of us who use ChatGPT know that there is now an audio function, so you can have a full-on conversation, an audio conversation with ChatGPT. And there are also companies like the ones I have on the slide here, Replica and Digi, whose business model is based on generating a companion AI for people. And so people form connections and bonds with these AI companions, and they experience real emotions in these types of relationships. And while some people might raise an eyebrow about that, I think it's important to realize that we are in the midst of a loneliness epidemic, and for some vulnerable people, having an AI companion to spend time with is preferable perhaps to the alternative. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And thanks to everyone. What a fascinating and diverse array of conversation starters. It's hard to know where to begin with that, but I'll just begin with myself. Mark, if my child becomes hysterical and aggressive and argues all sorts of issues when I try to manage their screen use, just hypothetically, how do I fix it fast?
Well, my answer would be that you can't fix it fast. You can fix it though, but the worst thing you can do is think that when you're in the middle of that battle that you're going to sort it out then. Do you know what I mean? And that's the advice we work with parents all the time. In the middle of a heated argument, it's not going to work. What you need to do is plan a time to sit down together and as a team design what the guidelines and the rules are going to be for our family and what we find important. And you've got to try and get the child to buy into that. And it's amazing that you can set them an assignment to find out from their friends, what's the appropriate screen time, blah, blah, blah. Bring it to the meeting, have an advocacy and sort it out then. And so when the next battle happens, at least you've got a set of plans and everything ready to go.
That's fascinating. And you really do find that the buy-in works and it sticks?
It works, but it takes a little bit of work, and I could go on about the techniques to do that for hours, but just to cut it really short, it's get the child to buy in, give them some power to determine how it's going to be, get them to do research on Google about, what's appropriate kind of for them to be doing, what's the appropriate disciplines if they don't, present that to you in a meeting, sort it all out and develop a plan together.
And that sounds like it's the sort of technique which, while it could be applied to screen time, it basically is a technique that presumably could be applied to all sorts of problems. Yeah,
exactly.
So I was wondering, are there unique challenges that you noticed in kids arising from the use of technology, or are they iterations of perennial problems with some evidence-based solutions that are just hard to apply?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's not one I know of research into, so forgive me if this is kind of an anecdotal answer, but I'd say that these problems have always been there. It's just that they're hothouse now, and we see kids that are absolutely addicted and one-eyed about, say, one game or something they play on the computer, that they become quite emotional, hysterical if they're asked to stop doing that. So that's probably always been there. If I was stopped practicing football on my guitar when I was a kid, I'd got pretty upset too. But, it seems like it's being really hothouse now with these kids addicted to these particular programs.
I should say also, if there's anyone in the panel who wants to chip in on any of these questions, you're more than welcome to. The next question, Mark, relates to online usage and trust, and I'm asking this partially as a parent, but also for my uncle, where you see similar versions of the same problem. Trust online and finding trusted sources. I mean, that is a problem in old school libraries as well as online, but the speed of access to material that you alluded to before can make it very easy for, like, the rabbit hole is closer and probably deeper. How should parents or relatives deal with the challenge of navigating loved ones to online, to trusted advice? In my experience, I just should point in the other direction, and then almost inevitably, if I say go to something untrusted, they'll go to something trusted. But no, genuinely, how do you do that?
I mean, I'm going through this at the moment with my own family.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because they say to me, "Oh, do you realize that I can, eat this root that I found in the backyard and I'll be..." I'm like, so it's interesting. I've been experimenting with this, and the thing that really brings us together is that we study human behavior, but we do it from an evidence space.
Yeah.
And this is what I've been trying to do, is work with my family to think about, and parents as well, that we see in our clinic, the word evidence. When you go on a website and it's telling you this or that or anything, just put into the search term, what's the evidence for it? And I find this really quite helpful. And if you, even if it's a medical treatment or a psychological technique or parenting thing, say, what is the evidence for this? And you get a whole bunch of different websites than just, you know, influencers and people just writing essays because they feel like that's the case. So evidence, I think that's a key word that we have to get people trained up to use as part of their internet.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the most pernicious presences online are those who co-opt that sort of language without backing it up with actual sort of compelling research. But the first step of actually getting people to think about the fact that there is such a thing as evidence, and that you need to find it and evaluate it, that can't hurt.
Yes.
Yeah. Jasmine, there's so much, fascinating work that you're doing. I wonder if you could just explain a little bit more what you were saying earlier about, I think was the phrase that you used, that in some cases the relationship was quite weak between what people view, and I wonder if you could just unpack that a little bit more, because in some ways that might be a little bit more hopeful than some of us tend to think. I think often people sort of draw very simplistic links between what you see and what people think, but tell us what you found.
Yeah, so I think there, you know, in the field of body image, but mental health more broadly, I think there's probably a lot of the research has been focused mainly on just how much time people are spending online. There's a big shift in the last few years to kind of go away from that, but there's been a lot of meta-analyses or studies now that kind of look at the effects across all of the literature, and even like umbrella reviews look at the meta-analysis and meta-analysis. And it's pretty consistent that they're finding that if we're just focusing on how much time people spend online, we're kind of missing, I think, some of the key reasons why it's helpful or harmful. It's not like a magazine that people pick up and everyone is exposed to the same content. Everyone's experience is slightly different. Our content depends on who we're following, what our friends are posting, and an algorithm kind of feeds us different content as well. So it's not that everyone's experience is the same, but it's also not that everyone exposed to the same content is going to be impacted in the same way. So I think that when we just talk about screen time, or we just talk about just time on social media, I think we're kind of overlooking that some's positive, some's negative. If someone has spent 5 hours looking at puppy videos, I wouldn't be worried about their body image. I probably think maybe there's better things you can do with your time, but it's not likely to negatively impact their mental health. But if they're spending a lot of time looking at idealized content or other kind of harmful content, then that's when spending time online might be concerning. But I think we need to be talking about time spent in relation to what they're exposed to when they're online.
And I was wondering as well, given the ease of access digitally, do you think that if you like, the cohort of people who might be particularly vulnerable to these pernicious influences is a larger cohort these days than it was when, you know, negative body image issues or messages may still be being spread, but it's by old-fashioned print?
Yeah, it's hard to know. So I think like when you look at reviews looking at trends in body image concerns over time, I don't think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that they've particularly spiked since the advent of social media. Body image has been a concern for a long time. So like, you know, Mission Australia's Youth Mental Health report, has been going for 12 years now, and young Australians have consistently said body image is among their top concerns. So this was before social media was around. The things that happen on social media are similar to what happens offline, but as Mark said, it's more of a hothouse. So it's just a bit more extreme. The amount of ideal content is more. The ability to edit your appearance has made the potential ideals even more unattainable. And talking about AI, there's concerns about AI influencers becoming potentially very popular in the next few years. And my concern is currently that they're even more sexualized, idealized than human influencers. So I think what we're seeing now online isn't incredibly different from what we had before. It's just the amount of exposure and the extremity of it. So I don't know, I think potentially it's young people are more concerned about their bodies, but I don't think that's clear.
And it's interesting, you talk about the amount of it. That is certainly a sense I think that everyone has about interacting online, just the overwhelming volume of messages that might be concerning. I understand you've done some research into what can work to counteract things like that. And one thing I was wondering is how much counteraction is required to because if it has to be like for like, then we're fighting a losing battle, it seems to me. But what have you found about the way different, more positive images can either moderate or reduce the harm?
So we've recently done a study which we use what we call a micro intervention, where we got young women to follow a page on social media where we posted like a few times a day some positive content amongst all the other content they see on social media. And over a 2-week period, we did find improvements in their body image just from having that brief exposure. It's something we need to replicate and see if it's there. It's only like one study, but I think there could be potential for even little bursts of this kind of positive content. It's also some of my collaborators in Europe have found similar kind of effects recently, that potentially even a small amount. And interestingly, in some recent studies we're doing, when we're looking at how different types of people react to this content, what is a trend that's coming out is that for young women who have internalized beauty ideals to a greater extent, so they're the ones that are usually more vulnerable to body image concerns, they're more negatively impacted by viewing idealized content, but they're also more positively impacted by viewing positive content. So for people who are low in internalization of these ideals, it doesn't matter so much if they see negative or positive content, but for those who are high, it seems to really impact them more, both positively and negatively.
That's really interesting. And we're talking there about exposure. I mean, another topic which I think is very front of mind at the moment is regulation, the idea of limiting access to images. Where do you look to in terms of the sort of the leaders of regulatory models, and is there evidence yet about whether or not those sorts of approaches actually work?
Yeah, I think we always need more policy-focused research to inform, but I think we do have enough literature to actually make informed decisions. I just hope that the government pay attention to that literature. I think that in regard to body image, I think that the idealized content, there was a meta-analysis of 87 experimental studies. There's quite a lot of studies looking at these topics, and so we do know that looking at this ideal content can be harmful. And so I think there's enough evidence to show that we should be doing things to reduce how prevalent that content is. And I think that when it comes to regulation, there are things that can be done. They can require platforms to have more diversity inbuilt into their algorithms. So that could be done for body image, but it could also be done for other topics where people become quite, get quite extreme views. When it comes to just banning, I'm sure everybody has different opinions on that. I think that kind of takes the conversation away from making it safe for everybody. And I think we desperately need regulation, but I think we need it to be focused on making the platforms safer in the first place.
At this point, I should just pause to acknowledge our sponsors, Betfair, who are a great... No. Andrew, in Australia, I was going to say the debate, that might be putting it a bit high, but there is talk of age restrictions as a means of trying to protect and preserve the mental health of children, or not have them exposed to some of the more pernicious influences. Is there evidence that would work, and is the tech there to make it work?
How long have we got?
Just in 30 seconds or less, if you could.
Okay. I don't want to speak for everybody here, but I think you alluded to the literature on this. The literature overwhelmingly shows there isn't a one silver bullet to protect people online, such as set an age restriction. And in fact, if we do a hard age restriction and it's a blanket one, then we're actually putting a lot of problems in the way of training people in the digital world as well. I'll try to keep this as short as I can because it is a complex topic. It's a nuanced answer, but essentially age restrictions should be used to some degree. The problem is how do you actually enable them to have some teeth? Because saying to a company, set your age restriction at 16, that company will still say, well, if it's broken, what do we do about it? They're not set up for that. So how do we then use law enforcement and how do we use society and so on? And so that part of it is not answered yet, at least not that I've clearly seen. So the second part of my answer within 15 seconds left is that we do actually look at things like digital citizenship training, which is actually introducing kids at different stages to parts of the internet that can be beneficial to them. We do this with exercise and sports science. We do this with food and dietary. We do this with sleeping. We do this with social behavior. There is countless programs we introduce from early childhood centres all the way through to university. We do need to look at the internet like that in that respect. If we put this just on an age restriction, we're putting all our eggs in one basket. I don't think that's the right answer.
When we think about the risks for young people, adolescents in particular, we've also had quite a few references to the potential benefits and positive sides of online access. If we're talking about baskets, how big are those relative baskets? And is the good basket big enough to be able to, give us some confidence?
So let's look at the good basket. The good basket has got so much great social connectedness there. And I'm not talking social media. I'm talking simple things that most of you kids might have already done. Engaging in what you would curate as educational content. Bluey, for example. Getting kids involved in socialization through small YouTube clips that you actually have. So for example, I am not sponsored by Google, Meta, or any company when I say this. But if we look at like YouTube Kids, they have a curated content that is actually a lot safer than wide open YouTube. So there's some responsibility taken there, but there's still a parental involvement that's needed. One of the biggest things I've seen over 25 years of doing this is that parents are not as informed as what they should be. And so it's funny, we've got a lot of great parenting programs on how to raise our kids, but not necessarily within the digital age. We've got to catch that up a lot. So to come back to the good basket, there's socialization, there's education, there's health, there's a lot of things to do with creativity that helps creative minds and skill sets that are needed that they're going to have in high school. And I'm sure there must be parents in the audience right now that have been told, we don't want phones in schools, but we want your kids to have a device that they can work on. So my kid's about to start high school. Can't have a phone, but he needs a laptop. Well, what do we do about this? So we've got a complete paradox going on right now. We need responsible programs to actually help us through that and allow us to focus on the good and protect us from the bad.
Yeah, I was thinking, when you talk about that, I was thinking about the hours I spent hearing my son playing online games. But I think I also hear him learning social skills and interaction skills, just in a way that I never learned how to do it. And there is a lot of creativity out there as well, whether it's Minecraft or Roblox or whatever. I mean, we've been banned for those platforms for years, but still, I'm told that there are.
What we found with the Kids Helpline study was that the young people, and to give you actual numbers here, 130,000 young people wanted to be on social media where they felt safe. And 130,000 of them over that time also wanted to be able to talk to kids that weren't in their towns, that they could share their stories with and not be judged, but they wanted to keep their anonymity. This allowed them to become advocates for their mental health problems, to help themselves and help each other with their mental health problems. And if the internet did not exist and they weren't able to access the service we were provided, and in fact, at one point when ethics was ending and we had to end the study, kids were worried, what are you going to do with us? Because we've created these relationships online that are important to our mental health. So we need to look at that social construct as much as we do the dangers. And the funny thing is when you start looking down at young people's savviness of dangers online, it actually has shown, and this is for the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, that they've become more savvy on the dangers online by simply reducing their circle of context. If we go back to when Facebook started in 2004, people would friend everybody. Now we're seeing people be more restricted in their friend groups and more protective of their data. Not perfectly, but we're seeing the change.
Fascinating. As long as you don't ever tell my son that I said this, what you were saying reminded me of when my son encountered some inappropriate content at quite a young age. And I did talk to him about it, and I said to him afterwards, I said, just out of interest, how did you find this content? He went, oh, good. So yeah, we'll speak to you later, Mark, about that one. I'll have to just get a reference for it. Thanks, Andrew. That's fascinating. Rebecca, how much has living in the digital age, do you think, affected and fundamentally changed friendships and romantic relationships?
I think the fact that we now have such amazing opportunities to connect with people has made a fundamental shift to how we have friendships and even romantic partnerships. You can go online and look for like-minded people, find Reddit groups and Facebook groups and support, companionship, and meet people from all over the world. So I think, unlike back in my day, where if I had a pen pal who lived in France, I might write 1 or 2 letters and then that would be the end of it. Now we can keep those kinds of connections going. We can meet people all over the world, and not just people we want to form friendships with, but it opens these online dating apps that I mentioned before, open a whole new world of possibilities for romantic partners that we might want to encounter. So I think there's still an appetite for meeting people the old-fashioned way in university settings and in bars and pubs and by doing activities that people like to do, but the online world has made it accessible for people to get a whole more diverse input from potential friends and partners.
You mentioned long-term relationships. I was wondering when you were talking about that, is there evidence that there are just more long-term relationships, long-distance relationships? Yeah.
I'm not sure about evidence of more long-distance relationships, but I know of some research that's tried to compare long-distance relationships with geographically close relationships. And perhaps surprisingly, there's not a huge difference in relationship satisfaction for those 2 types of relationships, whereas in the past, those long-distance relationships would have been more strained, just because there would have been less opportunity to keep your partner kind of informed about the day-to-day mundane tasks that we're doing, expressing our affection, expressing our doubts, and seeking reassurance. That used to be much harder to do. Now that we have this suite of tools, it makes things easier for people to stay in those relationships and to stay satisfied in those relationships. They might experience things differently in close versus long distance relationships, but there seems to be a better opportunities for people to remain in long distance relationships now.
That's very interesting. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to us about how you see the rise of AI impacting on relationships. I think this is a fascinating area, and I think it is inevitably coming, regardless of what reservations we might have, and and it's more here than we might realise.
Yeah.
But I must say, the more I've seen and heard of it, I perhaps naively think that there might be some. I think there's the possibility for some optimism or changing the way that we relate to technology that could be quite positive for people. What do you think?
It's an interesting area. I think all of us on the panel have various thoughts about it. The research isn't there yet, so I'm only speaking kind of from what my thoughts are about this. And I think there's lots of opportunities for good, but I don't yet see these AI companions as being able to replace human interaction. Sherry Turkle from MIT has a great quote that I'm probably going to butcher. It's something like, people who want to have AI companion relationships, they want the companionship without the risks of intimacy, because your AI companion is non-judgmental and is never going to call you out for some of the things that you say and think and do. When you're in a real relationship with a human being, there are risks about being vulnerable and having that person interact with you. And so, although there are some positives, I still don't think we're at the point yet where the human interaction is going to be replaced by the AI companions, but they can serve as a kind of bridge, particularly for people who have, say, high social anxiety or who struggle with rejection sensitivity. Having an opportunity to interact with an AI companion might sort of serve as a training ground for making people to feel more comfortable when they're out there in the real world.
It's interesting when you say we're not there yet. I wonder how quickly we might be getting there, though. It does seem like even in the last 12 or 24 months, the quality of those sorts of products, or at least access to products of quite high quality seems to have increased substantially. Yeah, and Andrew, what are your thoughts on this subject? I was wondering how much you think things have changed since the Simmersian Holdings. The types of virtual or artificial engagement that are possible now are just so different.
To be honest, it's night and day difference. It's light years ahead. So back, if we go into 2010, to give you a quick example of how we created virtual humans in that sense, it was still a person writing scripts. It was a person sitting behind the avatar who had great effect and emotions and had humor and anger and all these behaviors that we wanted clinicians to deal with, and how to calm somebody down without actually having a real client in front of them. But the script of the person talking was still like choose your own adventure. You gave them an answer, and then it popped up 3 or 4 things it would say, and you'd sort of pick which one it's responding to you about. So it was very clunky. Today, with large language learning machines and actually studying the way we have different speech variables, mannerisms, interactivity, even pupil dilation is getting so good that we can tell without verbal cues whether AI is interacting with us. Now, I just came back from a conference 2 weeks ago where, and I was mentioning to the panel tonight, I met somebody, one of the world's first people to have intracranial brain implants so that they can actually upload thoughts to the cloud. And it really, his name's Dr. Galen Buckwater, if you want to look him up. He had his surgery 8 months ago. It was through University of Southern California. And we were asking, was he actually uploading his personality to the cloud that could be used as an AI form? The answer was yes. So we're now looking at that sense of people wanting to have connections with somebody who may pass. And that's one of the reasons why he's uploading, because he has terminal illness. So we're looking at things that are going well beyond the studies and of psychology and person and the self right now. But where we are seeing drive on a consumer level is needs and wants. And so when we come back to relationships, loneliness absolutely is one of the highest rated problems in most developed countries at the moment. I would presume in most countries in general. And then the second part is actually how AI can be used to manipulate us. And I hate to say it, but there is that dark side, and we need to be able to detect it as soon as we can.
Mark, I was thinking about your map earlier with all those red lines going out, different levels of accessibility through online access. How would you feel if there were a whole lot more red lines, but those red lines were from bots that were administering the basic sort of talking therapy that you would be doing, but done by quite sophisticated large language models?
I think it's going to happen whether I like it or not.
Yeah.
And one of my all-time heroes, the most cited psychologist in Australia, called me aside recently and he said, "You've designed lots of websites, haven't you, to give parenting advice to people?" And yep. And each one takes hundreds of thousands of dollars and so much work like that. And he said, "I want to show you something." And it was just ChatGPT. And he said, "Watch this." And he said, "I'm a parent. My child won't go to school, is refusing. What should I do?" And he showed me the answer and I was completely blown away by it. It was what would have taken weeks and weeks of high-level masters, PhD level people to write, and it was done within 2 minutes. Now, that's the good side of it. There's bad sides of this that are going to come that I can't even begin to imagine at the moment. But we live in a country with one of the best healthcare systems in the world, and yet children who have got mental health needs in Australia, less than 1 in 4 are getting to see somebody to get any kind of help, and only a small amount of those are getting evidence-based care. If you're in the country and all that, it's worse. So the online system is really helping that, but we're still so far behind getting help to the kids that need it. And post-COVID now, if you're talking about autism and ADHD, the waiting list, the whole system is clogged and we cannot get access and help to people. So, this is going to be a revolution and we're going to have to use AI.
Yeah, because when you were mentioning the ChatGPT thing, I was thinking about, well, what if that answer from ChatGPT was then done in a reassuring voice or the voice of Mark Datz, which is not that hard to do. And there are commercial services like that available
Yes.
already. I mean, are many people using them in Australia? Those sorts of things.
There's a few companies playing around with it at the moment. So Leap Forward AI is looking at that for rehabilitation counselling. Leora AI is doing it for mental health and developing. To be honest, the porting of people's voices, like Mark's very lovely voice.
You don't want my voice.
Yeah, but if
Squeaky.
it's still copyright. He's
Yeah.
a living person, so you know there's money to be had. There's money to be had.
I'd rather James Bond's voice.
Jasmine, I was wondering in the area of body image, the increasing awareness of the ability to generate or fake images, is there potential that could diffuse some of the concerns or the focus that people have on these issues, because we're just so aware now that everything can be made up and manipulated, and it's done really well to the point that you just can't expect that what you perceive and what seems real to you is?
So there's not a lot of research on like
Sure, yeah,
AI
early
completely
days, yeah,
created avatars, but there is research that we've done and others have done looking at disclaimer labels on edited images. So there are, I think governments in France and Israel and Norway have required, say, magazines, and in Norway it was also social media influencers, to have a disclaimer if an image had been digitally edited. And the idea was, if you know it's been edited, you won't compare to it, it won't be harmful. But the literature shows that it's completely ineffective.
No.
It does not matter if someone knows it's been edited. You still compare to it. You still want to look like that because that's the ideal being promoted. So when it comes to AI avatars, maybe there's something different about knowing that that was never a human versus like an edited human. But I don't know. We need to know more. But I would be... what we know so far, I'd be surprised if it...
Yeah, if you did have to lay a bet on
it
that.
diffused the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that if that...
Well,
And
scratch my naive optimism for 1 second.
if that's the ideals being promoted, I think people will still try to look like that.
But we might move to questions from the audience now. We've got a couple of microphones, I think, that are available. If you'd like to ask a question, pop your hand up and we'll try to get through as many as we can. Just a reminder, if you can try and keep your questions concise, that would be great, because it means we'll be able to hear from more of you. And if anyone in the panel wants to sort of, well, if you want to ask each other questions, feel free to go ahead. While we're doing that, have any of you heard the podcast Shell Game? Highly recommend it. It's a tech journalist in America who linked a voice generator of himself to ChatGPT and sent it out to start interacting with work colleagues, his wife, his kids, his friends, his therapist, and his online therapist. There's a hilarious moment where his AI talks to an online therapist, and they mismatch, and his AI starts giving therapy to the therapists until it all gets back on. But it is amazing, and it's jaw-dropping in terms of how real and compelling. And I mean, I found myself thinking for the first time, I can see how you could actually find talking to a voice-generated AI really soothing and rewarding, and yeah, that there might be times in life where that's quite valuable. But enough of that. We've got one question over here. Anyone else want to ask a question? Pop your hand up now so we can get the microphone to you.
One thing I haven't heard tonight, but I hear in my classroom very often, is alpha male, and anything to do with that kind of respect coming out of the 12 and 13-year-olds' mouths. What should I do? What's the response? Have you done any research on this that you can help me with?
So we're all looking to Mark.
Research into it. This is very interesting. This is something that we're seeing as well, and I even see it within my family. Young males who can quote bait the guy, whatever his name is, Tate, yeah, and just know it all. And I'm like, where did you hear about this? And it's in the networks and all that sort of thing. I think probably the best parallel we have to it is for things like eating, the body image and so on, where how can we counter it? There's no way we're going to be able to ban it and just have that one approach. Do you know what I mean? It's going to need multiple things. And an idea that I hear come up for all of us is that these complex problems, you can't solve them with one way of doing it. When we talk about raising a child, there's the raising them with a village. And in psychology, there was this models of like Bronfenbrenner, that a child's positive development is proportional to which the systems in their life are cooperative and agree and work together and so on. So just one person going, you shouldn't listen to Tate, or it's trying to stop it, or we try and ban it. You've really got to have the schools and the parents and the government with legislation and training of the kids, and all of those things come together to produce a generation that's going to be less vulnerable to this stuff that's on the line. So that's not an answer that might help you to next week with these kids. But I think that that's the only way we're going to do it, is with a village and producing positive role models instead of just, those ones.
Does anyone think the actual influence of Andrew Tate is overstated?
Well, we're a research group, so we don't. We can only give you opinions on that. It probably is.
Because certainly the brand recognition, for want of a better
Is
expression,
huge.
is huge.
Yeah.
But I do wonder sometimes whether a whole lot of assumptions about how influential those ideas are might be overstated. I don't know. Another question. I think. What over here, and then we had one. I think over there somewhere. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah.
Hey, with the trend now of mental health and seeing the negatives and positives of technology, do many companies have initiatives to sort of treat this, or are many of them still following the classic business model of getting people hooked and using the tech?
I'm going to go with the latter, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer it in two ways, if you don't mind. So one is the straightforward answer of are they sort of like really caring? Yes, they are, mainly because they are starting to see that sick days are a loss of productivity, and retention of workforce is better than loss of workforce. So for the work that I do in consultancy with a lot of the companies, and we're talking even banks, they'll talk to me about what is technology we can use to leverage and help people. The number one thing I tell them, and this is the second part of the answer, is it's not about the technology, it's about the message. What is it you really want to do? If it's a case of you want to keep them in their seats to do their jobs and be productive, that's not caring. That's just making sure the business keeps going. How do you want to care more with the technology you want to use? So, for example, are you familiar with EAP, so employment assistance programs and things like that? They're changing quite dramatically in industry right now to not just be we're here when things go wrong. We're going to be preventative. We're going to start doing exercise programs. We're going to do mental health awareness programs, cultural awareness programs, and so on. They're doing it more through technology and hoping that, in a way, the transition of us caring for you as a company will lead your loyalty back to caring for the company even more. So there is a human-centered point, but if you use technology in the way of we're just going to cut corners, make it short and sharp, it won't work. Hope that answers your question.
Sorry. I think in regards to like platforms as well, I don't know if that's relevant to your question, but I think that they are trying to implement different things, and often, I don't know if, I think they kind of, a new thing's launched one day and you never know what's coming. But I have a feeling, again, I don't know definitely, but there's always in mind the things that seem to be changed can be beneficial, but don't get at the core of maybe changing the algorithms or things that are likely to be beneficial for mental health. So there's probably a balance with implementing things to help, but I think you're going to need regulation to make meaningful change, in my opinion.
And no doubt, to some extent, it is preemptive reaction to the increasing tide of calls for regulation,
Scrutiny, yeah.
try and implement it themselves and do it in a way that they can own and control and,
Exactly.
and minimise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my questions that I had, sorry, the microphone will take too long to get here, was about the Instagram team account, which is a new thing that Instagram is setting up. How effective do you think that would be? Obviously, there's no research on that, so just based on your opinion. And also, do you think that would change relationships between parents, task, and children?
So the question's about the Instagram teen account, which was introduced, well, I think it was really like in the last month or something, is that right? Yeah. Does anyone want to dive into that?
Yeah, what do you think about?
Don't know anything about Okay. Look, again, there's very little research. In a way, it was just kind of announced almost at the time that we heard age restrictions being announced. That was kind of very convenient. Yeah, I'm being cynical, but the truth of the matter is that young people are still going to access what they want to access. So setting up a teen account doesn't mean to say, oh, great, every teenager will just go live there. It's very unlikely. What's on it that's different, or what is it? How does it work? I haven't seen under the hood yet, so I really don't know. But it all comes down to one last thing when you get these new products and programs that come out. What is the onus on the company? What are they doing about it? It's great that they're offering a product, but what is really their responsibility to that product? And when you do that 72-page scrolling thing and then hit agree, you'll find somewhere in there it says, you know, we can't account for what might happen on here. And so I'm not sure. I am skeptical. Yeah.
I think as well, it's hard to know when they change things. So like they removed likes in Australia and then they came back. And then, so yeah.
Yeah, and functionality is one thing, accessibility is another. I mean, if you've ever tried to terminate your Amazon account, I hope you had a good half day, and I hope you're more successful than I was. So yeah, oftentimes the infrastructure is put in place, but not in a way that's accessible, and call me a cynic.
This is for Rebecca. With so many relationships starting online, what are we losing?
Ooh, great question. What are we losing with the online, with the initiation of relationships online? There's one study that I'm aware of that's compared people who met their partners online with people who met their partners offline. And as I alluded to before, it didn't seem like there's much in big picture things, there's not much different. One thing that did stand out was people who are meeting each other online, they rate their partners as less fun than people who meet face to face. But they're just as attracted to the partners that they meet online versus off. And they rate people in terms of some of the big factors for attraction, like warmth, kindness, intelligence, and hotness. That is the technical term. There's no difference between what people are doing when they meet people online and offline. So it looks like maybe they're a little bit less fun, but maybe they're in the grand scheme of things, that's not such a big deal for people. It's not a deal breaker.
Fun's very hard to assess scientifically, unlike hotness, obviously.
Hi, everyone. I'm a startup founder and a dad of an 8-year-old.
Get out! No, sorry.
This is slightly more out there. Like, you know, with intelligence being more outsourced to the machines in the next 5, maybe 10 years, would humanity or would the next generation lean more towards empathy? And what does that mean from a mental health perspective? Would we become more open to connections, or would we start imploding? Thank you.
So
Wow.
will the rise of AI intelligence tend humans towards more empathy? Is that the question? Yeah.
Gee, I'm going to just throw out a skeptical answer to that and say, I'm not sure that as a species, as an animal, that we can change that quickly. The culture can change, and we can, the way we engage with the culture online and the mores of our culture and all that, but our proneness to empathy and violence and sex and aversion and all of those things, some of those are fairly, you know, kind of deeply rooted in us as an animal, I think. And I worry when we try to deny that, or because you see it, and you see it in the dark corners of the web and everywhere that it's still occurring. But I mean, we're going to get into a question here of cultural determinants of human versus, you know, biological, The biological parts would say we can't change that quickly, but maybe there's cultural determinants of our behaviour immediately towards each other that will change if we feel we're being scrutinised, or that's the norm that is expected in the kind of online culture and so on.
Yeah, it might be easier to train AI to empathy than humans.
We try to train young children who don't have empathy to have empathy, and it's really hard.
That's actually what I was about to say too, is that, you know, we'll go into the studies of empathy training. It's not something you just naturally pick up. It's very much practiced, and it's very situational. And we'll look at the variables that were involved in it. It's complex. AI, I suppose, on an optimistic point of view of AI, is that it's very unlikely we're going to get AI duplicating or replicating empathy at levels that we can see in humanity. I don't want to say anytime soon or anytime in the future. I just think broadly it's going to be very, very difficult. Having said that, AI's kindness, if we look at it as a sense of kindness, yes, we can program that, but then it's a case of, can we make sure the kindness is for good and not Machiavellian reasons? So, you know, it gets complicated, but fantastic question.
Really interesting. Thank you. Question over here.
I thought about like the First Nations and other different types of cultures, and there was a consultancy that went out to a remote Aboriginal community and thought, hey, instead of us, you know, trying to get permission for photos, we'll just create one of those, an Aboriginal person from typical Central Australia, but in front of a rock. And so when they went out to see this community, they were like, who is this person? And so absolutely destroyed that trust. And I wonder, in this age of mental health and, you know, First Nations communities getting more access to digital data and things like that, any thoughts and ideas of how do you explore and provide appropriate mental health things for mob?
Oh,
Good, tough question.
Yeah, tough question.
Wouldn't know where to begin. This is probably coming at it from a left field. It's one of the things that my team does at the moment. We work in cybersecurity as well. We actually do outreach with a company called ID Care to Indigenous populations to teach them about scams. And so we're trying to get them to understand the basics of how they can get scammed on their phone, because quite commonly a family might have one phone between 4 or 5 members, and they might have all their banking details and so on like that. My experience, and it's only one experience only, it was last year in Alice Springs. We were on one of those outreaches, and I met a family, and we had to just get them to understand what capabilities existed. And that was the first thing. And once they understood the capabilities, then we talked about, what do you think could be done against you, which is a horrible question and thing to put to them. And so getting them to sort of imagine how to protect themselves from these things is kind of just an example of building trust. We're here before it happens. But to answer your specific question of how do you rebuild trust after AI has been used, I wouldn't know, unfortunately. I think it has to be community-centered, and I think it also has to be culturally driven. And that's where you teach what is able and then let them experiment. But, you know, that's a long journey, worthwhile, very worthwhile. Yeah.
Question over here, and then we'll go up to the back. Yep, we've probably got time for a couple more questions.
Thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. I have a quick question about the AI companionship. Do you think that these will eventually lead to a cultivation of an echo chamber generation, simply because they won't question the thoughts that natural interaction does with humans?
So that's a very real possibility. And also the way that these models work is they're trained on, they ask you, the AI companions in particular, you fill out a series of questions, you give the AI your responses, and it just keeps sending back to you what you want to hear. And that's the cycle, the echo chamber that you're talking about. And it just sort of suggests that and it kind of goes back to the question before about online dating versus offline dating. Being involved with an AI companion suggests that it's not learning anything new. It's just learns all about you. It's fascinated to learn about you and keeps telling you what you want to hear. And also kind of bridging across some of the questions we've heard before about empathy with an AI companion. It's possible that the script that it sends back to you, the language that you get in return in these exchanges, sounds like an empathic response, but you know that you're talking to an AI chatbot. So there's always going to be, for some people, a barrier there where they can hear what sounds like validation and understanding, but knowing that there's this mental block, oh, it's not real. And there's people who do TikTok videos who show an interaction that they've had with their AI boyfriend, and then they say, whoa, I had to stop for a minute and remind myself this isn't real. So I think echo chamber is certainly part of it, and a lack of, for some people, they won't make that distinction between this isn't real, this is just listening to this is just validating and repeating what I've already said, and other people will have a different experience with it. Do I think it's going to contribute to mental health? I think that we need to do more research on that.
Few.
Imagine though how far this can go though. You know, the idea that it'll just be this echo chamber that's just loving you unconditionally. There'll probably be a company that goes, you can get the bot and set the challenge level you want.
Yeah, totally.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it just challenges you a bit, or I mean, this is going to go way down the road of human values.
You bet. We've probably got time for one last question. I think we had the microphone at the back.
Based on
two last questions. One last question.
Based on most of these issues having been around for a long time, is it really just a lack of our parenting skills, and that's now being tested? And you did mention there was evidence-based tools for parents. Where do we get them?
Okay, it's great this came up.
Yeah.
Can I, first of all, that's such a good question. Thank you. It's very important that we don't parent blame, you know, that this is a result of our parenting this or that or the other thing, because I can tell you when you look at the research on how children turn out, the children determine the parenting just as much as the parenting determines the child. And, you know, so the parents are in a dance with the child and they're not just to blame for how the child works out. But having said that, Australia actually punches way above its weight in terms of really good evidence-based parenting programs that not only improve the mental health of the children, but make the parents feel better as well. And I'm talking about Triple P and Parent Works. And if you go to the best site in Australia is really the Raising Children's Network, which is an evidence-based one out of Victoria.
Raisingchildren.net.au on your screen now.
Thank you. There are wonderful programs to help parents with, you know, do the best with their kids.
Don't go to raisingchildren.com.au, very different. And I think we have time for one last question. We will have to leave it there.
My question's regarding like how many ages of iterations we are away from Marx and Weber, and how much we can still rely on those principles in the big five, or do you see another branch emerging?
What was the...
So was it
like how much can we still rely on those traditional...
on the analysis of Marx and
social
Weber, is that right?
models to treat and diagnose, or do you see another branch of social sciences sort of emerging in this time now?
I don't know those. Well, I feel really embarrassed. I don't know.
We might need to take that one on notice and all contemplate that after the session. I think I'm not sure that we'll be able to cover that one now, unless anyone has a 30-second answer that can cover that off.
Sorry.
Well, thanks for the question. Sorry we couldn't engage with it now, and I'm sure that everyone will be hanging around and having a bit of a chat afterwards as well if you want to discuss more. But look, thanks very much to let's please thank everyone on the panel this evening: Mark Dadds, Desmond Galudi, Andrew J. Campbell, and Rebecca Pincus. And thanks also to the University of Sydney for hosting today's event. Hope you've had a good time. Thanks for coming out. Good evening.